On a busy street full of noise and strangers, an old beggar woman stretched out her hand for a single coin. But when a young man bent down to give it, she froze, because that touch, that single moment, brought her face to face with the son she'd lost 17 years ago. The city breathed in a dozen rhythms: the clatter of rickshaws, the hiss of a street vendor's stove, the distant wail of a train. It was a late autumn morning, air crisp enough to sting the cheeks, but soft, with golden light that made the puddles on the pavement look like broken mirrors. People moved through the market like shoals of fish, diverted, purposeful, unaware of the small dramas that happened between vendor stalls and the service. Doors of apartment blocks, on a narrow patch of sidewalk near a crowded chai stall, an old woman sat cross-legged on a faded shawl. Her hair was the color of dust, and her face was a map of winter's deep lines, etched from years of worry and laughter that had long since faded. She wore a scarf tied tight around her neck. It was threadbare at the edges and pinned with a tiny, rusty coin for some stubborn memory of dignity. In front of her lay a chipped metal cup and a single, dented bowl with a smear of leftover lentils. Her right hand rested on her knee. Her left hand trembled slightly, palm open and waiting. People passed. A boy on a bicycle knocked the cup with his knee and steered away without looking back. A woman with a high bun and red lipstick dropped an extra rupee into the bowl and hurried on, checking her phone. The old woman's eyes followed each passer-by, not in hope, but in habit. Habit had become the friend that stayed when others left. At the end of the stall's line, a young man in a well-tailored suit pushed through the crowd. The morning light fell on him like an exclamation. Clean shoes, a crisp collar, a leather briefcase with neat stitching. He moved with the economy of someone who had learned how to make time obedient to plans. When he stopped to order tea, the chaos of the market seemed to fold around him like a stage set rearranging to present him at center. He reached into his pocket for change. His fingers brushed a handful of coins and a small scrap of paper. Receipt, grocery list, the kind of small, ordinary things that keep a person tethered to the day. A stray coin rolled free and began to fall. Instinct, not conscience, made his hand follow the coin's path. It would land near the old woman. He could have bent and rolled it away, but his knee eased toward her, and for a slow heartbeat he considered the small ritual of charity he'd been taught. Drop, back away, leave the world improved. As his hand came down, the old woman looked up. The world condensed into a single, ridiculous second. His palm, the coin, the rough skin of her hand. Their eyes met. He was 29 or 30. Age was a measurement of experience more than digits, and his face had a lean familiarity, the kind memory keeps for lovers and lost towns. The old woman blinked and then froze, her breath catching like a glass blower's work. There was a set to his brow. There was the shape of his jaw. There was a tiny notch on his left index finger where a ring had once been. A child's memory is peculiar. It hoards small details like treasure. He felt it too, an ache like a tide turning. For a moment, his mind made slow, improbable connections as if something inside him had been translating from another language. The old woman's scarf, how it fell across one shoulder, was the exact way his mother used to drape hers in the thin photographs he kept folded in the back of a drawer. He had not seen her in 17 years. She had been a name, a rumor, a single photograph with a hole burned through one corner. He had grown into a city that had taught him to measure time in paychecks and flights and the muffled thud of ambition. The photograph had once been a map he traced when the nights felt too wide. He had told himself stories about what had become of her. Maybe she had married again. Maybe she had left. Maybe she had been swallowed by the city's teeth. He had not anticipated this. The coin slipped from his fingers and landed with a quiet pat in the bowl. He forgot to move. He forgot the chai seller's question. "Are you all right?" the seller asked, voice distant. The young man did not answer. His hand, a hand that had signed contracts and scribbled figures, lifted on its own toward the woman. When his fingers brushed hers, both of them felt the shock of recognition like cold water poured into hot clay. Her palm was paper thin, veins blue as rivers. He saw the shapelessness of time in those veins. Accidents, births, hunger, 1,000 nameless small things. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, and the million other times as well. Her mouth opened. No sound came. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes, startlingly bright against the clean lines of his face. "Mom?" His voice broke. It was small and unadorned. No accusation, no sermon, just a question that carried a whole childhood inside. In that one syllable, she found 1,000 mornings. A rough palm combing damp hair, a voice soft and strict, plates too few to go round. Her body seemed to remember what her mind could not. She rose, or rather, began to rise, as if pulled by the invisible rope of the name. She clutched his hand hard, as if the world might let go. "Beta," she whispered, the word more breath than sound. Her voice had become a fragile reed, old with waiting. She pressed her forehead to the back of his hand, and for an unmeasured span of time, the market's noise turned to a blur, and the city's motion slid off like water off oilcloth. People gathered slowly, because such scenes have gravity. A child pointed. The chai seller stopped ladling tea. Someone took out a phone. The young man and the old woman were an island of silence. He unfolded the stories in his mind. Why had she left? Where had she gone? What had she suffered? And all of them were crude tools against the fact of her here and his here now. "You left," he said accidentally, the word somewhere between accusation and apology. "Why did you leave?" She laughed, a strangled, awkward sound, and then she cried. "I didn't—" She did not finish. There are reasons that are too sharp to hold under daylight. She had been young once, full of hope or fear, or whatever small calculus had seemed sensible then. She had made a choice, and the city, which is not gentle with those who choose wrong or are chosen by wrong, had scattered the rest like chaff. She had thought him dead the first time she heard the rumor. She had taken wrong trains. She had refused help until she could not refuse the shape of hunger. And then, when the city had turned her into the woman at the stall, she had walked and begged and survived. Sometimes survival is less a victory than a daily erasure. He listened. He let her choose what to say. She spoke in fragments about a quarrel that had burned like dry grass, a letter she had never sent, a house that had slipped out from under her like a tide. He filled the gaps with the evidence of his own life, how he had grown up in an orphanage for a few years, how a distant aunt had taken him in, how he learned to work and study until he had a small room with a window that opened to a brick wall. He had never stopped looking in small ways. He had not known whether to call it hope or a bad habit. When the market started to remember itself, someone pushed forward with a plastic chair. The chai seller handed them 2 steaming cups. Neither of them drank at first. They held the cups between, shaking hands, and let the steam warm their faces like a private sun. The young man fumbled through his briefcase for a folded photograph. It was a low-quality print, yellow at the edges. He placed it in the woman's lap. Her hands trembled as she widened her eyes to see the face that had belonged to her like a second skin. She touched the creases of the photograph with the gentleness of a person recovering something lost from the earth. Neighbors of fate gathered, some with pity, some with suspicion, some with the hungry. Hope that human stories like this might be softened versions of their own. A woman with a thermos offered extra samosas as if food could salt a memory. A boy who had earlier bumped the cup returned a few coins and a shy apology. A small kindness here, a larger one there. Charity moved around the circle like a currency of grace. The young man and his mother spoke for a long time, and in that speaking, both of them found that the past was a living thing that could be poked into new shapes. Plans were made, small things first. He insisted they find a shelter so she could sleep in a bed with a blanket that wasn't a shawl. She was reluctant. Pride and shame are cousins that do not part easily. "We will talk to someone," he said. "We will sort it. No more asking on street corners." She nodded, but the lines on her face did not smooth out overnight. Healing is always granular, gathering up one steady step at a time. He could not promise to erase the decade of absence. He could only promise presence, a substance more valuable sometimes than explanations. He would be there to learn the shape of her days anew. She would be there to teach him how to laugh at the minor cruelties and how to eat the morning slow. When the city began to move again in earnest, horns, a call to prayer, the flap of a vendor's awning, they rose together. It was an odd procession. A woman with the world in her palms leaning on the arm of the man who had once been a small, lost thing. They walked beneath laundry lines and neon signs and the indifferent face of a metropolis. People turned to watch, then turned away to their own lives, and for a while that was enough. Before they left, the young man slipped his handkerchief into the old woman's scarf, gently tucking it where it would not fall. "For the rain," he said unnecessarily, because some pledges live better in small gestures. She smiled, that slow, miraculous smile that teaches the eyes first. He felt something like a bridge click into place, a small, private architecture between two bodies that had been adrift too long. Later, they sat together in a small shelter, with a thin mattress and the soft, tired hum of a ceiling fan. They gathered the scattered papers of their lives, made calls, asked questions, and cooked whatever little they could afford. Time did what it always does. Sometimes It wounded, sometimes it healed, but for that morning, for a cup of chai, and for the coin that had turned into a hand, it was enough. The city returned to its rhythm, yet that moment, that reunion, remained like a quiet prayer hidden in the dust of the street forever.